I still remember the way she looked that spring morning when she told me no. Not angry, not afraid, just certain. The kind of certainty that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you will not tolerate. Her name was Eleanor Marsh, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my entitled, hollow life. The sunlight caught her hair through the doorway, turning it the color of honey and wheat. She wore a simple cotton dress, pale blue, mended at the sleeves but clean. Her hands were strong from work, not soft like the society girls my mother kept introducing me to at dinner parties. There was something real about her, something unbroken by the particular cruelty of frontier poverty. I was 23, heir to the largest bank west of St. Louis, and I had never been told no by anyone who mattered. My father owned half the county. The other half owed him money. When I wanted something, I took it. When I wanted someone, they came. Eleanor did not come. She stood in the doorway of her father's modest farmhouse, flowers still dusting her hands from the morning bread, and looked at me the way you look at something broken that cannot be fixed. I had brought flowers, expensive ones, shipped from San Francisco. I had worn my finest suit. I had even practiced the speech. She let me finish. Then she said, "No thank you, Mr. Langford. I don't believe we would suit each other." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought she was playing some game I did not yet understand. Women did that sometimes, made you work for it, made you chase. It was part of the dance. But Eleanor was not dancing. "I mean it," she said quietly. "Please don't come back." The door closed. I stood there on the porch, holding imported roses, feeling something I had never felt before. Rejection. The sharp, unfamiliar sting of being unwanted by the one thing I wanted most. I went home and drank myself stupid. My father found me in the study at midnight, still holding an empty bottle. I told him what happened. He did what he always did when I complained. He fixed it. 3 days later, Eleanor's father lost his farm. The bank called in a loan he could not pay. My father offered to forgive the debt if Eleanor reconsidered my proposal. She refused. They lost everything. I thought that would be enough. I thought she would come crawling back, humbled, broken, ready to accept the generosity I was offering. Instead, she and her father moved to a smaller plot on the edge of town and rebuilt from nothing. She worked as a seamstress. She kept her head high. She still said no. That was when I stopped asking politely. I started drinking heavier. I started talking louder in the saloon about the farm girl who thought she was too good for a Langford. My friends laughed. My father looked away. And one night, drunk and angry and tired of being made to feel small by someone who owned nothing, I said something I should not have said. I said someone should teach her a lesson about pride. I did not tell them to do it. I want that on record. I did not give the order. I just said the words loud enough for the wrong ears to hear, and then I went home and passed out. 2 days later, they found her in the town square. She had been tied to the old whipping post, the one they used to use on runaway slaves before the war. Her hands were bound behind her. Her dress was torn. And her face, God, her face. They had poured lye on her, burned her so badly the flesh had melted down one side, twisting her mouth, closing one eye, leaving her looking like something pulled half alive from a fire. I heard about it in the saloon. Someone ran in shouting. I remember the way my whiskey glass stopped halfway to my mouth, frozen there, like my hand had forgotten how to move. I remember the silence that followed, thick and accusatory. Every man in that room looked at me, not with horror, with knowledge. They knew. They all knew. I walked to the square like a man walking to his own execution. The crowd had already gathered, women crying, men standing with their hats in their hands. The sheriff was cutting her down as I arrived. Her father was on his knees in the dust, making sounds I had never heard a human make before. The town doctor said she would live. He said it like that was supposed to be a comfort. No one was arrested. No one was even questioned. The sheriff came to my father's house, asked a few soft questions, and left satisfied. My father never looked at me the same way after that. Not with anger, with something worse. Disgust tempered by obligation. Eleanor did not speak for a month. When she finally did, her voice was different, rougher, like the fire had gotten inside her throat and changed her from the inside out. She did not accuse anyone. She did not point fingers. She just existed, half-faced and silent, a walking reminder of what happened to girls who said no to the wrong men. The town changed around her in subtle ways. Women crossed the street when they saw her coming, not from cruelty, but from a superstitious fear that disfigurement might be contagious. Children stared until their mothers slapped their hands and pulled them away. The preacher mentioned her in a sermon about Job's suffering, which somehow made it worse, as if her face was now a lesson to be learned rather than an injustice to be addressed. She took up sewing. Her father had nothing left to give her, so she sat outside the general store with a basket of mending and worked with steady hands. The burned side of her face was always turned toward the wall. She did not hide it out of shame, I realized later, but out of mercy for those who could not bear to look. I watched her sometimes from across the street, pretending to conduct business while really just observing the wreckage I had made. She never hurried. Her fingers moved through the fabric with the same grace she had once moved through her father's garden. Back when her face was whole, and the world had not yet taught her what men like me were capable of when told no. I avoided the town square for weeks. When I finally saw her again, she was sitting in that same spot, needle moving in and out of fabric with mechanical precision. Her hands moved steadily, her ruined face bent over the work. She did not look up when I passed. She did not flinch. She just kept sewing, like I was not even there. That was worse than if she had screamed. The silence between us became a permanent thing, a weight I carried everywhere. At dinner parties, I would catch my reflection in the silver and see my unmarked face and hate it. At night, alone in my room, I would drink until the guilt turned to anger, then anger back to guilt, then finally to nothing at all. I started dreaming about her, not as she was before. I dreamed about the moment it happened. I saw it in fragments. The men holding her down, the bottle, her scream. I woke gasping, unable to escape what I had set in motion. Months went by, a year. I got engaged to a banker's daughter from Denver, a pale girl who said yes to everything and meant none of it. The wedding was planned. My father was pleased. I was numb. And then one autumn morning, he came to town. I did not see him at first. I was standing outside the land office discussing a foreclosure with the clerk when I heard the horse. A single rider moving slow down the main street, the kind of slow that makes people stop and look. He was tall, lean, weathered in the way men get when they have lived outside the law for a long time. His face was scarred badly on the left side, old burn marks that ran from temple to jaw. He wore no badge. He carried no visible weapon. He just rode down the center of town like he owned it. He stopped in front of the general store. Eleanor was there, same spot, same sewing. He dismounted without a word, walked up to her, and knelt. She looked at him. For the first time since the burning, I saw her face change. Not soften, not smile. Just wake up. He said something too quiet for me to hear. She nodded once. He stood, offered his hand, and she took it. They walked together to the sheriff's office. I followed, along with half the town. We watched through the window as Eleanor spoke to the sheriff for 10 minutes. The sheriff's face went white, then red. Then he walked out and looked directly at me. "She is pressing charges," he said. I laughed again. Same hollow sound as before. "On what grounds?" "Assault, conspiracy, attempted murder." The scarred man stepped out of the office. He looked at me with eyes that had seen things I could not imagine and said in a voice like gravel grinding bone, "She is coming with me. You try to stop her, you deal with me." I opened my mouth. My father's voice cut through the crowd before I could speak. "Let her go." I turned. My father stood on the bank steps, old and tired and done. He looked at me like I was something that had died a long time ago, but had not yet stopped moving. "Let her go," he said again. "You have done enough." The scarred man helped Eleanor onto his horse. She sat behind him, her ruined face turned toward the sun, and for the first time in a year, I saw something in her expression that looked like hope. They rode out of town together. No one stopped them. No one said a word. I stood in the street, watching the dust settle, and felt the particular weight of a man who has finally understood what he has done and knows he can never undo it. The wedding was called off. My father died that winter. I inherited everything and felt nothing. The bank thrived, the town grew, I became respectable, powerful, influential, but I never married, I never loved. I spent the rest of my life carrying the memory of a girl who said no and paid for it with her face, and a scarred stranger who saw past the surface to the soul beneath. 20 years later, I saw them again. I was passing through a settlement near the Colorado border. The town was called Redemption, which seemed like God's particular sense of humor. I was walking past a small schoolhouse when I heard singing, children's voices working through an old hymn. I stopped. Through the window, I saw her. Eleanor stood at the front of the room, her scarred face turned toward a dozen children. The girl with the clouded eye, the boy with the twisted leg, the small one with burned scars on her arms, the ones every proper school had turned away, the ones she had gathered and given what the world would not. Hope. He stood in the doorway, watchful, protective, still scarred, still silent. The man who had seen past her ruined face to the unbroken soul beneath. She saw me. Our eyes met across 2 decades and 1,000 unspoken apologies. I watched recognition move across her face like a shadow. Not fear, not anger, just acknowledgement of something that no longer held power over her present. I stepped inside, removing my hat. The children fell quiet, sensing something. Eleanor, I said. My voice cracked on her name. I've thought about that day every single... She raised one hand gently, stopping me mid-confession. The scar tissue caught the afternoon light, and I saw in that ruined face something more beautiful than anything I had destroyed. Peace. Mr. Langford, she said, her voice even and final. You should go. Not angry, not vengeful, just done. She turned away. That was the lesson I deserved. Not anger, not vengeance. Just the quiet, permanent knowledge that I no longer existed in her world, that I had burned myself out of her story the day my pride demanded she suffer for saying no. That was the lesson I deserved. Not anger, not vengeance. Just the quiet, permanent knowledge that I no longer existed in her world, that I had burned myself out of her story the day my pride demanded she suffer for saying no. I left that town and never went back. Some debts cannot be repaid. Some scars run deeper than skin. And some men spend their whole lives learning that beauty was never what mattered. But by the time they learn it, the lesson comes too late.